Hi there. In today's class we'll have an introduction to verbs which will dominate this course for the next few weeks, and we'll look at the all-important difference between tense and aspect. So let's get started. So far we've looked at some basics about adjectives, adverbs, subject-verb agreement or noun-verb agreement, count and mass nouns, and so on. So now we really have to tackle verbs. A lot of the next few weeks will be tense and aspect, and then you can see we move on to other areas: futurity, conditionals, transitivity, verb patterns or verb complementation, and then voice. When I say voice, I mean passive voice. Until that time, all the verbs we'll be looking at will be in the active voice. After that, we'll be looking at noun phrase modification and relative clauses, participle clauses, some other clauses as well, before we move on to some of the more advanced areas such as emphasis and end weight and that kind of thing. Okay, so let's start now by looking at what we won't be looking at. I'm going to make the assumption, and hopefully it's not a dangerous assumption, that you already know these basics. Auxiliary verbs. If you don't know about auxiliary verbs, well, you will do, but if you're not sure about them, then do check them in your book, possibly before the next class, just to have a recap. I especially need you to know the verbs to be, to have, to do, to get. You'd be surprised. We're not going to look at question formation. Well, just once briefly, something about a princess, a sandwich and a monster. I'm just going to leave that dangling. We won't be looking at negative forms at all, but you could always have a look in your book at that. And then irregular verbs. I can't tell you the number of times, both on the grammar exam and in writing, I've seen people produce forms such as bringed or brang, teached, catched, led spelled L-E-A-D, like lead. No. You need to know these irregular verbs. There'll be a list in the back of your grammar book or in the back of your dictionary or somewhere online. In the exam, everything that I mark will be things we cover, but there's one exception: irregular verbs. If you do not use irregular verbs properly, or even if you spell them wrong, you will get marks taken off or you won't get a point. Okay, so that's the one example of something where you will be marked even though it's not explicitly taught on the course. We just really expect you to know irregular forms. Okay. Here's a quick note on terminology about participles, because these words will come up again and again during this part of the course. So there's the present participle and past participle. Notice, okay, with the walking, waiting, eating, that's an ing form, and there are different types of ing form like the gerund, etc. We'll look at all the different types much later on the course. Listen to this. I am walking, I was walking, I will be walking. Doesn't matter which tense or time or whatever you're using, the word ending in ing, is always the present participle. Even I was walking, it's still the present participle. Walked, waited, eaten, that form is always the past participle. Right, here we go. Tense and aspect. Here's a serious question for you. How many tenses do you think English has? Pause the video now to have a think about it. Maybe write down the number on a piece of paper. Okay, so if you pause it now and then come back in a moment. Okay. Have you got your number? Right, I'm not going to give you the answer yet. We'll come back to it very soon. First of all, let's learn some Finnish. Way! Yes, I'm being serious. We're going to look at some Finnish to help you with your English. First of all, though, if there are any Finnish speakers, I'm sorry, I'm about to destroy your language. I'm not even sure if this is all correct, if Luki is the correct form here. That doesn't matter. I'm using this to make a point about English. And yes, Finland is one of the 10 countries where I have taught English. Okay, first of all, I want to give you 3 words in Finnish. First of all, you've got the word hän, not hin, but hän. That means he or she. Finns don't make a difference there. Then we have luki, possibly, which is the past tense of the verb to read. And then kirja, which means book. It also means a book or the book. Okay, then we've got 2 very short Finnish sentences. Hän luki kirjan, he or she read a book. Hän luki kirjaa, he or she was reading a book. I want you to pause the video now to work out how Finnish is different to English. Have you worked it out yet? Obviously, we know that in sentence number 1, kirjan has an N on the end, and in sentence number 2, we have a second A in kirja. Let's imagine the book has 100 pages. Sentence 1, hän luki kirjan, he or she read a book. Then that person has read all 100 pages. It's a completed action. In sentence number 2, hän luki kirjaa, he or she was reading a book. And maybe they're on page 1, or page 20, or page 97. We don't know, but we do know that they started, but it's not a completed action. Okay? But isn't that weird? Because the verb is the same in both sentences. What we have to show whether the action is completed or not is a change to the ending of the word, a book. So that's quite different to how we see these things in English. We'll come back to Finnish again in just a moment, but first we need to look more specifically at tense and aspect. In very simple terms, tense is about time, the time that you are referring to when you speak. Languages have different ways of showing tense. For example, some Indian languages have 2 tenses. One of the tenses is for events within 24 hours from now, so that's both past and future, just within 24 hours. And the other tense is for events which have happened or will happen within beyond that 24-hour limit, in the past or the future. That's a very different way of thinking about time. Romance languages have 3 grammatical tenses. For example, in French, j'étais, je suis, je serai. Okay? German and English only have 2 grammatical tenses, past and present. That's a very common combination in the world. Ich war, ich bin, ich werde sein. Okay? I was, I am, I will be. So for the future, we don't have just one grammatical form like the French je serai. Instead, we have to use other ways to talk about the future. Okay, now let's look at aspect. Aspect is not about tense. It's not about time in that way. Aspect gives us other information, such as whether an action is completed or not. As you saw in the example, in Finnish, aspect is shown through morphology. For example, changing the ending of the direct object. In German, you typically have to use additional words such as jetzt. I believe that there are some dialects which have, for example, ich bin am Sitzen. Is that Rheinland-Pfalz? Somewhere like that, with one of the meanings of I'm sitting. I'm not sure about that. In English, aspect is shown in the verb form. In other words, English verbs contain information about both tense and aspect. There are 4 types of aspect in English: simple, continuous, perfect simple, which we normally in language teaching just call perfect, and perfect continuous. Let's talk a little bit more about terminology. On this course, I will use the terminology in the same order as it is used throughout the world of English language teaching, including in your grammar book. So the names of verb forms will always appear in this order. The very first word will be the tense. So present or past. And actually the books also use future, even though future isn't a tense, it's future time or futurity. Then in the next slot there will be aspect, and also in the third slot as well if there are 2 words for the aspect. In the 4th slot we have voice, that's active or passive. Basically I won't say anything if it's active, but if it's passive then we will have the word passive there. So the 4 types, for example in English, past simple, past continuous, past perfect simple, but as I said we don't normally say simple, and past perfect continuous. These can be changed for different tenses but with the same aspect, so present simple, present continuous, present perfect continuous. Okay. Now let's look at that list I had with the number of tenses. Oh look, I've gone very patriotic, red, white and blue. Oh dear. Okay, the 4 forms which are in red are in the present tense. So present simple, present continuous, present perfect continuous. The forms in white are in the past. Past simple, past continuous, past perfect continuous, and then the used to past form and the would past form. The forms in blue are all future time or futurity. And these are sometimes called, I'll tell you what, let's look at the terminology for that when we come to it. And I've written etc. at the end because there are even more forms to refer to the future. Okay, so I hope that's been of some help. In our next class we're going to look at the differences between the present simple and present continuous. Now before you say, hang on David, we've done that every year for the last 8, 9, 10 years. That's true. But there's some things which they always seem to miss out at school, and these are some really important, crucial differences between them. So watch that video with an open mind, because there's definitely something to learn. See you then.